So we've talked about some of the causes of World War II. And so as we jump into a lot of this conflict, remember originally, once again, the United States was not involved in this, but we're going to focus on really European situations happening because of German aggression and aggression being aggressive, showing in this case a lot of force and a lot of willingness to fight and take on really quite a few countries in Europe to try to get dominance and basically take over as much land and gain as much power as possible. And so that's what was going on with Germany at the time. So the German military, very successful at first in the early years of World War II, they pretty much just took over as much land as they could, and there was very little resistance. Most of the countries near Germany once again had experienced just devastation and lots of lives lost in World War I, and really did not want to get involved into another war. So they kind of let Germany do this. They even negotiated and allowed Germany to take back some land. This was called appeasement. They were basically just trying to keep the peace and allow Germany, they thought, make them happy, and to the point where there would not be any more conflict and war. But Germany just kept going, and they advanced. And so this force of soldiers that Hitler had, tanks, airplanes, they quickly conquered much of Western Europe, and something, their strategy was known as blitzkrieg, which means lightning war. Just very quickly, this method of like warfare was really responsible for Germany being so successful early on, where they would attack as quickly as they can. And it was focusing on, really, they had radio communication back and forth and made it very effective to coordinate and advance very quickly. And it was effective because the other countries were not able to stay organized and communicate and get everything concentrated enough to fight Germany. And so they were able to push in quickly and take over a bunch of land. And so here, once Germany continues through Poland, that way they started heading west into France and took over France in June of 1940. And now it was really just Great Britain. Britain stood against Germany and these Axis powers. Remember, Italy is heading more south into northern Africa, taking over land. Japan, the other third of the Axis powers, was taking over part of China and heading that direction. And so Britain had to stand up against Germany on their own at this point. And so Winston Churchill, the leader of the British government, was looking for help. He urged President Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, to help. But remember, most Americans did not want to get involved in the war. We were across the ocean. We thought, excuse me, we could stay out of this war because, once again, we did not want to get involved in something where it would cost the lives of many Americans, and just lots of death and destruction was happening again. And so most Americans wanted to stay out of this. That's isolationism, be isolated in a way. So they did not jump in and help Winston Churchill right away. And so, like I said, we still in the 1930s, moving into the 1940s, like we still had the Great Depression that we were dealing with, and many Americans wanted the government to focus on getting us out of these troubles. With the New Deal, things had started to turn around some, but it was not completely turned around, the economy. And so Americans wanted to focus on our country, and they did not want to get involved. This was isolationism, as I said. And so U.S. did offer to help Great Britain any way they could. They offered as many military supplies as they needed. Britain took on some of these resources, but we did not offer troops, and we did not offer our army and our forces to come over and get involved in the war yet. We just supplied them with as much help as we could without getting lives at risk with fighting, at least initially at this point. But Britain actually did an amazing job holding off Germany. And so in the spring of 1941, the British Air Force, the RAF, Royal Air Force, won the Battle of Britain, and they were safe, at least right now, from German invasion. But all of a sudden, things had changed, and the United States would very quickly get involved in this war because Japan is taking over China at this point and is heading into basically wanted to take over Asia as much as they could, like Germany was looking to take over as much of Europe. And so by 1941, the Japanese forces, they controlled much of China, Southeast Asia, and we spoke out against this. We were not happy. The United States said, the leaders said, Japan is trying to expand, and their power is extending way beyond where they should be heading. And it was getting to the point where we were worried about what was going to happen. So we spoke out and said, this is wrong. Stop trying to take over all this land. And so the Japanese generals did not like the United States getting involved, at least verbally. We did not want to fight them. But the Japanese generals decided to attack the United States. And so we'll talk more about this, but the bombing of Pearl Harbor in the morning of December 7, 1941, Japanese planes came in and attacked this naval base in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. And so Japanese bombs sank many American warships, destroyed hundreds of airplanes. They tried to shoot them down before they could get up into the air, and more than 2,300 American soldiers, sailors, civilians were killed during this attack. And so we'll get into more details about Pearl Harbor, but at this point, the United States, this was very much an act of war, and so we had no choice, but Americans wanted us at this point. Their minds were changed, like, we have to get involved in this war, because remember, even though this involves Japan in the Pacific Ocean, Japan was in an alliance with Germany, and we were getting begged for our help, and so we decided to jump in. And so right after this attack, things changed drastically as far as how we were going to handle things. So when the news reached Winston Churchill, he talked to President Roosevelt, and they formed a plan to basically join forces here and get to the point where enabling, like, it took us a while, the United States, to get all of the forces over and actually get involved in the war. And so even though this attack on Pearl Harbor changed our minds and we did get involved, it would be several months until we were really able to offer a lot of assistance as far as troops. But we were heading in this direction. And so this next day, December 7, 1941, one of the more famous speeches a president has ever given, said that this is a date that will live in infamy. Infamy, it's kind of like the word famous, but in this case, it's live in infamy. In our minds, this will be a historic event that is tragic, and people will remember this, where the United States was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. And so as he announced this, that Japan had attacked us, this is something that, this was an act of war. And so at Roosevelt's request, Congress did declare war, and the United States was now part of the Allied forces. And so you hear this is kind of sums up how the military and the Navy and the armed forces feel about this war. This Navy surgeon wrote, "It's not going to be an easy job, in my opinion. We have the ability and skill, but it is going to mean many sacrifices for all in a long, hard pull. This is going to be really another example of a war that a lot of lives were risked and lost. People gave up their lives for freedom and for democracy and for fighting and protecting people and doing what they thought was right and needed to be done. But anytime you have people in a war doing this, you have the troops and the government all involved. But in World War II, there were a lot of citizens and women got involved, the role of women, and the people at home had to make lots of sacrifices too. So we'll talk about that. But this really is the start of the war now for the United States jumping in. We'll kind of hit pause right now and pick up later and talk a little more detail about how this war, where we headed next.